Constantly adjusting energy to a frequency undetectable by the sword was rare and difficult. It would only be possible for a demon of pure blood, a demonic dragon, or perhaps a natural-born madman, someone who manipulated demonic energy as effortlessly as breathing. Now the woman heard her nephew ask if he was an elite candidate worthy of praise. In the kitchen of that enormous mansion, all the demons seemed to be properly performing their respective duties. Even the head chef, a large demon specialized in and passionate about the culinary arts, worked with absolute dedication. He carefully imported his strawberries and decorated a beautiful tart with his own skilled hand. Meanwhile, the young master watched from a distance, unable to believe that the strawberry cake he loved so much was made by him. The demon was immensely pleased to see the young master in the kitchen and asked how he could help. However, the protagonist revealed that he wanted to use the kitchen to bake cookies, as he wanted to give them to someone. Maya, upon hearing this, panicked, imagining that the young master intended to give them to another woman. Even so, the chef politely asked the young master to leave the cookies to him, promising he would take care of everything. However, the protagonist insisted that he was capable of making them himself, and besides, it was important that he did it personally. Soon after, a liquid splashed onto his face, causing him to glance over at two furious demons stirring a pot. After that little mishap, he left the kitchen and went looking for his aunt, who was with his father. The woman asked Christian what had happened for him to suddenly show up and greet them. He replied that he heard she was about to leave, so he came to say goodbye, and she suggested he rest, as he must have been exhausted. Christian asked her not to worry, as he had something special he wanted to give her before she left. As she untied the ribbon on the box, she saw that it was cookies and, slightly blushing, said she didn't need such a gift. The young man smiled and said he had made the cookies with his own hands, which made his father recall when he had asked about the aunt's favorite things. He quickly realized it had been so he could prepare something special himself, while the woman looked curiously at the box. The nephew asked her to at least try one, as he was eager to hear her opinion. Even skeptical about the quality of the cookies, she decided to taste one, since their appearance was simply irresistible. However, as soon as she took a bite, she realized it wasn't just the appearance that was good, the taste was unbelievable. With her face slightly flushed, she said the cookies were delicious, and the young man was overjoyed to hear it. She commented that since she had received such a tasty gift, she would like to repay the gesture somehow, which pleased Christian. The young man then took the opportunity to say that, if possible, he would like her to truly become his aunt from that moment on. The woman replied that since they were already related by blood, he wasn't exactly asking just to call her aunt. She understood what it meant. She knew he wanted her by his side in the struggle for succession. She then stated, with regret, that she couldn't grant that request. She said that, as he already knew, the family elders needed to remain impartial toward the potential successors. Even so, the young man insisted that he was only asking from the heart. He just wanted her to draw closer to him as a person. The woman found the request somewhat manipulative, and was certain he had other intentions behind his words. But Christian said that, if by any chance she decided to side with her beloved nephew, he wouldn't be able to refuse. Young Christian wasted no time making faces like an innocent angel. Still eating the cookies, she said that his sincerity wasn't as irritating as it seemed. She remarked that, being her nephew and having given her cookies, it was only natural that she cared for him. She then asked if she could try more of those cookies, while the father watched everything with silent pride. The young man seized the moment to make his final move and declared that, if he felt hurt or resentful, the cookies wouldn't taste the same. At that moment, the woman realized she had been subtly tricked by that cunning young man, so she asked if he would consider joining the Dark Order. She commented that, in the duel against Merlin, he had shown himself to be a genius by executing truly impressive skills. She said that maybe he did have a talent capable of surpassing even the Dark Lord himself, but his rivals were tough. She feared he would fall before even reaching his full potential. The young man assured her that, if he couldn't overcome even those obstacles, then it wouldn't matter whether he lived or died. Showing determination, he thanked his aunt for her concern, but said he didn't believe in thinking about defeat. She looked at him and realized the boy had absurd confidence. She knew Christian had an uncommon resolve in choosing to follow a path filled with blood and challenges. However, as she mounted her horse, she decided to give him a word of advice just in case. She asked him to be cautious around the first young lady. That was when the Count asked if his sister was talking about Yulian, since he believed she was the most peaceful among the 5 princes. The one replied that the boy would understand that in time, and he thanked her, saying he would keep the advice in mind. From atop her horse, she said they would see each other again soon. After his aunt left, Christian threw himself onto the soft bed in his room, lost in thought. He reflected on how incredibly strong both his father and aunt were. They had both reached level 6. Still, he had heard very few concrete reports about their feats during the Great War, which made him wonder. He thought there must be even more powerful warriors out there, possibly capable of crushing the Army of Light completely. Lying down with his eyes fixed on the ceiling, he refused to let history repeat itself, and knew that, in 1 month, he needed to become stronger. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, a month had gone by, and he once again stood before his father. The Count had something important to report to his son, which was why he summoned him to that private place. However, as soon as he noticed his son's presence, he felt that something had changed profoundly. Staring intently at Christian, he asked if he had finally reached level 2, because he looked completely different. Seeing his son reach the 2-star level truly impressed the Duke, although Christian said there was no need for such astonishment, since he had already promised it would happen. Even so, he wanted to know what subject his father wished to discuss for calling him at that hour. Without delay, the father explained that he had received a message from the main family. It stated that he had submitted Christian and Thren as candidates for the sacred dark rite. However, when the response arrived, they had accepted only the younger son and rejected Christian. They claimed to have justifiable reasons such as frivolous spending, a reputation for womanizing, excessive alcohol consumption, and even petty theft. Additionally, they accused him of property damage and frequent involvement in fights. Even knowing all of that was true, the father was furious, feeling that the disdain they showed toward his son was offensive. Christian asked if the decision had come from the Viscount, but the father assured him it hadn't. He stated that it was the doing of Loin de Barning, a direct member of the main family's bloodline. Both of them shared the opinion that Loin was dangerous, influential, and on the rise within the sacred dark rite. In that ritual, candidates consumed pure darkness to reach new levels of power. Since the amount of darkness was limited, candidates had to fight each other in semi-lethal battles to determine the hierarchy. If Loin was the favorite, he could monopolize the darkness and thus become the 6th young lord. Christian's father tried to calm him, saying he would try another nomination, but the son rejected the idea. Christian stated he preferred to handle it with his own hands, even if his father thought he had changed too much. He believed that certain matters should be left for adults to resolve, but not this one. Chris already had a certain affection and respect for the man who was now his father, despite their past distance. Still, he thanked him for the gesture and said he had his own methods for achieving his goals. At that moment, the father suspected that those methods were questionable, but asked if he already had a plan. That's when Christian asked if the sons of the House of Count Tyreman were among the collateral families of the bloodline. Upon hearing that family name, the Count immediately became furious, but the son asked him to calm down. He said it would be enough to prove his worth, as the Tyreman family would soon be hosting the hunt for the Dark Pill, and he would join as a shepherd. Meanwhile, in the domain of the clan leader, a woman stated that she had personally evaluated young Christian. Upon hearing that, the patriarch wanted to know what the boy was like, and she replied that he was incomparable to the others. Even so, the leader found it hard to believe. He remembered an arrogant boy who thought he was a genius, when in fact he was just a fake prodigy. The woman then stated that he had completely changed, and was now someone very different from the past. That sparked the leader's interest, who asked his daughter if she believed the young man could fulfill his long-awaited wish. She knew her father was still alive only because of that old and important desire, having refused death several times. Wisely, she replied that if he wasn't capable yet, then he was very close to becoming so. Of course, the patriarch didn't intend to intervene or take a position directly in a matter considered so trivial. But according to the woman, the young man was a true ferocious beast, though still just a child. Observing his daughter's stance in defense of her nephew, the patriarch noticed that she was already beginning to align with the boy. She lowered her head, reflecting on how her father had always been strict with those in whom he had great expectations. While she thought, she heard her father say that if she was willing to go that far, she had probably grown fond of the boy. As soon as he was summoned, the chief butler and vampire appeared before his lord. The red-haired, violet-eyed vampire was Simon, the chief butler of the Dark Magic clan. Simon confirmed with his master whether he was to only observe young Master Christian. After receiving confirmation, he said he fully understood and would act according to the orders given. Before leaving, he asked if he could play a small prank during the surveillance, which worried Christian's aunt. The Lord authorized it, but asked that Simon not go too far. However, judging by the vampire's appearance and reputation, it was clear he neither knew nor respected limits. Even though she was concerned, the woman said nothing. She simply watched silently as the butler departed. Deep down, she sincerely hoped her nephew would be able to overcome all the challenges safely. Elsewhere, a carriage crossed a beautiful landscape, heading toward its final destination. Inside the carriage, the protagonist reflected on having quickly reached the 2-star level, thanks to his natural talent. He knew he needed a dark pill to accumulate a large amount of energy in a short period. The problem was that capturing the demonic beast carriage off didn't automatically guarantee the right to a dark pill. As soon as the carriage stopped, the owner of the betting house ran to meet the young master. The moment he saw him, Christian asked if the man had come empty-handed. The man hurriedly showed a sack of coins and said that of course he had brought a gift. Before he could even finish speaking, Christian threw the sack of gold coins on the ground with disdain. Grandel didn't understand the reason for the rejection, but the young master clearly didn't like the gift. He knew that man was involved in illegal activities, and that could become a problem if others found out. He mentioned the tax evasion at the casino, leaving Grandel visibly cornered and eager to please him in any way. Placing a hand on his friend's shoulder, The young master said he urgently needed an ash pill. The news left Grandel worried, as the pill's value had recently increased considerably in the market. He said a bigger incentive would be necessary, so Christian asked Miss Maya to assist him. She, showing off her skills, said she would work wonders with those little toys in her hands. The man, seeing that crazed demoness, didn't even want to consider going through that kind of experience. He quickly said he would search for everything the young master desired without delay. Already inside the carriage, the young master also requested an extremely sharp dagger, surprising Grandel with the unusual request. After making all his requests, Christian continued on his journey inside the carriage. Grandel, watching the carriage pull away, felt completely powerless in the face of the situation. As the carriage followed its course, Maya wanted to know what the young master planned to do next. He told the coachman they would make a stop as he wished to visit a certain place. Upon arriving at the elixir shop's door, he was warmly welcomed by the attendants. As soon as he entered, he pointed to the shelf and requested a specific portion of a special elixir. While the owner placed the elixir on the table, Maya showed curiosity and wanted to understand his choice better. She knew that elixir was a powerful stimulant, strong enough to raise even an elephant's trunk. As much as Maya thought about it, she couldn't imagine any purpose for such a potent aphrodisiac. Raising her hand to her mouth, she asked the young master if he truly had that kind of intention. Visibly embarrassed and annoyed, he replied that it wasn't like that at all. With no other option, he explained that it wasn't for him and that he didn't need that kind of thing. From that, she concluded the aphrodisiac was for the count. While the shopkeeper remained stunned, Christian explained that his father was getting older and maybe needed a little stimulation. Then, looking seriously at the shopkeeper, he demanded that, for the count's honor, it be kept absolutely secret. The shop owner, terrified, solemnly swore that as long as he lived, no one would ever hear about that request. After settling the matter, the protagonist met with his father and brother. Pointing at Thurn, he demanded that he address him by his full title. Grumbling, the younger brother obeyed. Soon after, the topic shifted to the hunts for the ebony beast. Christian warned Thurn that they were dangerous and told him to be careful. The Duke, seeing his sons bickering, told him to stop fighting and just go finish off those beasts. Christian promised to return with great and glorious news. After that, the father turned to Thurn and wanted to know why he had called him Emperor King. Sometime later, already within the Tyreman family's territory, the butler informed them that young Master Christian would not be allowed in. The coachman, outraged, found it absurd that his lord was being denied entry to such a place. The butler explained that the order came from young Lord Alros, who had made his dislike for Christian quite clear. Faced with that, the protagonist asked if that meant he had to find lodging in the capital on his own. Very embarrassed and sweating nervously, the demon confirmed that yes, he would. Once again, the coachman protested furiously and even threatened the butler, trying to defend Christian's honor. But the protagonist was more interested in profiting from the situation and asked who would pay for his accommodations. When he heard the answer he was expecting, he was completely satisfied. Being informed that the Lord himself would cover the costs, he immediately went looking for the biggest and most luxurious hotel in the capital. He wanted the best room possible, since he wouldn't be paying a dime for it. Worried, the butler asked how much it would all cost, and the answer was no less than 100,000 rupees. Looking at the luggage, Christian ordered them to unpack everything within the hour, because afterward they'd go drink to celebrate. Inside one of the suitcases was a demoness, who emerged intending to surprise her young master. As soon as she appeared, she noticed the room was spacious, perfect for her to serve him with devotion. Shocked, Christian asked when exactly she had hidden herself in the luggage. She replied that she had done it only to serve him, thinking he missed her presence too much. From the look on his face, it seemed like he couldn't wait anymore, so she had decided to grant him that honor. Meanwhile, Lord Alros held in his hands the astronomical bill caused by the arrival of the unexpected guest. Christian, observing the third son of the Tyreman family, commented that he was a star and shouldn't complain so much. He stated that, considering what he did to the abusive doorman, the cost was actually quite cheap. That attitude from Christian made Alros furious, to the point of crumpling the bill in his hand. Overcome by rage, he released his beastly magic and asked if Christian was looking to visit the next world. However, by doing so, he revealed exactly what Christian wanted to see: Tyreman bloodline's famous beast-controlling magic. The protagonist realized it was very different from the taming techniques used by the Alliance. It was a form of dark magic that completely subdued creatures, nullifying their will. Enchantments of confusion, dread, and ecstasy intertwined to dull the beast's instincts. However, the system was more complex than he expected. It wasn't something one could master in a short time. He commented to Maya that, if they were going to face that big scary cat, they might need proper weapons. With that, she handed him a long staff. With the staff in hand, Christian told his rival that he could come at him with everything. The blonde youth refused to take orders from someone he considered so far beneath him as Christian. As soon as the command was given, the enormous beast charged and bit the staff with enough force to nearly snap it. Right after, it shook the staff violently and flung Christian along with it, now completely shattered. As he stood up, Christian commented that it wasn't half bad, but he thought it was cowardly to fight 2 against 1. He stated that, If he won, he wanted to enter the hunt not just as a monster handler, but also as a bodyguard. Those words left the spoiled young man intrigued, thinking Christian was extremely arrogant. He then declared that he would bring him to his knees, begging for mercy. With a command, he ordered his beast to finish the rival off for good. However, as soon as it received the command, the beast hesitated, its paws cracking the ground as it tried to stop. It felt afraid, as if it had seen something terrifying. Alros couldn't understand where his opponent had gone, but Christian was already behind him. Firmly gripping his staff, he struck the young rival from behind, who barely saw the attack. Wasting no time, Christian began striking repeatedly with the staff, intent on teaching his enemy a lesson. He then asked if it hurt and told him to suck it up, because there was plenty more where that came from. He added that even if the little brat cried, he wouldn't go easy on him. Firmly holding the beast's reins, he told the rival to shut up, saying he found his words disgusting. That creature no longer saw Christian as just an ordinary boy, but as the very embodiment of death. Because of that, it hesitated to obey and refused to follow its former master's commands. Alros couldn't understand how his once ferocious beast was now trembling in fear in a corner. That's when he realized Christian had actually touched the creature. With an excited expression, the protagonist revealed that he had only used a 2-star illusion spell. Now he would take over the fight himself, creating a magic circle beneath his own feet. With that, he summoned a new creature, a grotesque horse that looked like a cross between a dog and a nightmare. With his club resting on his shoulders, Christian asked the rival if he knew what happened to spoiled little punks. Then he launched a single strike directly at the head of the pampered boy. With no time to react, the rival fell flat on his back, nearly unconscious. Christian explained that the secret was not to wait for the transformation or give time for spellcasting. The trick was to beat them down before any of that happened. Now that its master was down, the summoned creature lost all reason to exist. Continuing his act as an unhinged youth, the protagonist was caught up in a game. He insisted the staff play with him, saying it was just a break, something they could do during their free time. Meanwhile, he asked Maya for a drink, which she served him with great enthusiasm. So she brought him a ginger drink, something he absolutely hated. All the while, he was constantly judged by the subordinate demons watching him. He knew exactly why the lord of that house had ordered someone to watch that boy. He definitely seemed like a lost cause. Aware of that, the protagonist invited them to join in the next round. He said that, in any case, their master had taken a serious beating and wouldn't be getting up until the next day. He also mentioned that if they played, he would keep everything that happened in the mansion that day a secret. They played all day, until a bit of light began to shine through the window. But it was already late at night, and they realized that Christian was still playing. Just like the demon playing with him, he also fell asleep at the table. Watching the scene, the others figured everyone was drunk after so many rounds. However, as soon as he noticed they turned their backs, Christian opened his eyes and kept watching. Now he could stop pretending, as the watchers had left, thinking he'd be passed out all night. To make sure they had really gone, he peeked through the window. After handing a blanket to Maya, he thought to himself that it was late in time to act. He told her he needed to step out for a moment and asked her not to follow him. Even though she didn't like the idea, Maya would obey and wait for her master. The only thing she wanted to know was whether he was taking in that backpack, the aphrodisiac he had bought earlier. Now she realized the aphrodisiac wasn't for the count, but for him, which saddened her as she couldn't serve him herself. Even so, she hoped he would have a successful night of fun, while he thought she really had no limits. After walking a bit, he had already reached the Khaitan mountain range. That was the region of the count's hideout, and as the rumor said, the aura of magical beasts there was truly incredible. Observing the vegetation, he knew the hunting grounds must be close. That's when he spotted 2 guards on watch in a secluded area. He noticed that only 2 guards, both quite careless, were making rounds. He had learned the invisibility spell from Maya, so he would be able to pass unnoticed. He remembered when he asked her about the spell and how she suspected he wanted to spy on girls. But at that moment, the spell was working perfectly and was extremely useful. He managed to sneak past the guards without even being noticed. He approached the altar, the endpoint where the ebony hunt would conclude. As he touched the ground, he sensed a dark atmosphere. The problem was the method of obtaining the ebony. He knew the beast, Karamazov, had to offer itself willingly. The creature itself needed to be pushed to such extreme fear that it would prefer death. In that way, like opposites meeting, intense fear and absolute ecstasy would be separated by only a thin line. In that instant, even a mere fragment could transform into authentic ebony. Now the protagonist understood why the Count controlled beasts through fear. With that, he remembered the previous beast and began planning to steal that house's secret technique. But he realized he could mix other substances and use the aphrodisiac to send the beast into a frenzy. Since he didn't have enough time to learn the secret technique, he needed to find another method. While thinking about it, he felt a strong presence and turned quickly. As he turned, he saw nothing, but he knew that someone, or something, was watching him from hiding. However, the protagonist was no novice in that world and could easily distinguish magical energies. So he began walking toward the direction where he felt the strongest magical presence. He walked until he reached the entrance of a deep cave and realized the place was dangerous. He didn't hesitate for a second and entered the cave, even sensing the heady concentration of energy. There was a powerful evil presence there. On top of that, a high-level dark barrier spell was active. Now he had doubts about that place. He thought it might be a Jima rift. Jima was the world of demons and demonic creatures, and a rift connecting Jima to the human world was right before him. The protagonist could hardly believe he had found something so phenomenal without even searching. And then he had an idea. He could lure the beast to that place, and on top of that, had the perfect ingredients for it. Since he had the aphrodisiac in hand, he thought everything was falling perfectly into place and grew eager for the hunt to begin. While he thought that, the Bat Butler continued to watch the young man, just as he had promised the Lord. After assuming a human form, he found it unbelievable that the young master could be such an intriguing person. He had taken down the arrogant one from the Tyreman house and also fooled the observers with his irresponsible attitude. He had infiltrated a forbidden place, all to carry out his own plans. It was so fascinating that the vampire felt an overwhelming urge to play a prank that led him to act on impulse and walk toward the rift, stepping through the magic circles. He cut his own hand and activated the magic cycle with his blood, placing it over the rift. As soon as the liquid touched the magic circle, the demon summoning was complete. The rift, now awakened, asked what the traitor desired, and the vampire butler could barely contain his excitement. After all the preparations, another day had dawned. The big day had arrived, and that moment would be marked by the hunt for the beasts. Lord Lauren's team was already ready, with their banner in hand. To keep things in order, the protagonist asked the leader if he was feeling well. The rival saw the protagonist placing his hand on his sword and said he was acting arrogant for carrying that thing. The protagonist replied that the sword worked better than a club, and he could test it if he wanted. Paran said to let it go. The hunter should begin the chase and lead the beast to the altar. While the bat watched everything, thinking he hadn't been seen, the protagonist pretended not to notice him. When the young lord called the protagonist with a mocking tone, he responded. They were close to the altar and seemed to be plotting a way to make the hunt more efficient. A young man with canine ears and snout asked the protagonist to stand aside so as not to get in the way. Seeing that, even as he stepped away, the protagonist scoffed. He wanted to move forward but was blocked. Perched in a tree, the protagonist wondered how long they would last trying to do it on their own. He knew that in the end, everything would go according to plan. After all, he had brought the sacred silver and dagger. A sound came from the foliage, drawing the attention of the two hunters in front of the protagonist. He knew that whatever it was coming, so he just stayed still, observing. The creature in question was a class 4 monster, quite beautiful, resembling a peacock. The protagonist set his eyes on it, thinking that the creature didn't look like much, and had a somewhat knave appearance. The subordinate asked the young master if he was ready to begin the hunt, and he requested that the master start the sealing magic right away. Sensing it was the right moment, the young master of that house began activating his seal. The two subordinates, along with the lord, began to cast their sealing spells. With the sealing magic, at first it looked like the beast would bow down before the hunters. However, all of a sudden, its eyes began to change, and its appearance shifted as well. What once looked like a gentle peacock now had terrifying eyes and rows of sharp teeth. Not even the young master of that house had imagined the creature could be so frightening. That's how he was caught off guard when the creature slapped him in the face with its paw. As he was launched into the air, his dog-eared subordinate ran to check if the young master was okay. Whatever was on the wings of that huge beast seemed to be poison, and even though everyone tried to put up a barrier to defend themselves, their young master didn't seem to be managing well. They were having a hard time, and the protagonist could tell. From a distance, he knew they wouldn't be able to hold him back, since he was completely out of his mind due to the aphrodisiac. The young hunter knew that, even though everyone had taken the antidote against the beast's poison, staying exposed for too long would be dangerous. The order was to hold the beast at all costs. However, the beast was completely disoriented, and its instincts now ruled above all else. The creature charged at the young master, and not even his subordinates could defend him. When he realized things were about to get serious, he shut one eye and raised his arm in front of his face. Something caught his attention. It was so surreal that he opened both eyes in that direction. His rival was saving his hide, saying that Count Tyreman's house was a failure and that it was a waste of time for a busy man like him to be helping. He then said that if the young man agreed to call him older brother, maybe he'd help. The young man tried to refuse, but the protagonist warned that they didn't have any more time to waste. Looking to the side, he saw that the subordinate was already being poisoned by the venom's strong presence. Grinding his teeth in frustration, he was ready to accept and call the protagonist Big Bro. With all that, Christian wanted him to keep his word after being saved, and so he struck the beast with his sword, making the creature submit to him temporarily. Then he used the sealing symbol in front of the young man, showing he could also use spells. And it wasn't just any magic, it was the sealing magic used by that family. The young man was intrigued, since he had only seen it once before in front of his rival. Or maybe the protagonist thought it was just lame of his rival to think only he could do such a thing. He even mocked it, saying that intermediate sealing magic wasn't that complicated. He continued holding that moving rope, covered in magic and thorns. And not just that, he managed to mount the wild beast and now dictated its fate. With swift steps, he rode the creature away from that place. The young lord of that region tried to warn the protagonist that he was heading in the direction of Gehenna, but the protagonist knew that very well, and so he just looked back briefly. In no time, the fierce beast entered the cave, and its behavior began to shift. Although it was already crazed, it seemed somewhat different as soon as it saw the red circle. The protagonist asked the beast if this was the first time it was feeling the true evil of Gehenna. He told the creature to feel a deep fear and enjoy every second of that emotion. That beast seemed to go into total ecstasy when faced with such horrifying fear. Within moments, its eyes turned golden, and it began to drool excessively. And as that was happening, the protagonist was ready to draw his silver dagger. After grabbing it, he plunged the dagger, causing a fatal wound to the creature. As he made that extremely calculated move, the others managed to catch up to him. The young lord of those lands warned that this was the most dangerous cave and they should leave. Meanwhile, the protagonist pretended to be retrieving something from within the fallen creature and said the young lord was too cowardly. Then he pulled the sphere out of the beast and handed it to his rival, saying it was a sacred orb. With the orb in hand and offering it to the rival, the young man noticed it wasn't ebony, but rather sacred silver. That left the young man quite disappointed, as it wasn't what he had been expecting. A close friend of that young master said it was all that bastard's fault for interfering. Even so, the rival was grateful for what the protagonist had done by saving his vassals. He was also happy because, thanks to the protagonist, they had made it through without any serious casualties. Christian listened silently, knowing he was the main culprit, and had also traded the ebony for the silver. He thought that since he had already started, he might as well go all the way, so he pointed at the spoiled brat and demanded he keep his word. From that moment on, he should call him Big Brother, just as they had agreed, and he shouldn't break the promise. While the two were stuck in that standoff, a powerful pressure was felt by everyone. The young master's vassals were all on the ground. The pressure was so great that they couldn't withstand it. The blonde youth stared in confusion, unable to understand what was happening, while the protagonist knew exactly what was about to occur. That was the presence of a true demon, the most relentless kind, and Christian could hardly believe his own eyes. Meanwhile, that monster was calling the humans little toys and saying it had been centuries since it had seen so many. The blonde youth stepped in front and told Christian to run. Since he was an outsider, maybe the monster wouldn't target him. But the protagonist wasn't interested in running. He knew very well that this was all the bat's doing. Christian realized he would have to deal with that winged spy, and so he drew his dagger. With incredible aim, he threw a strike at the spying bat and hit it. The dagger struck the center of that small red creature, shattering it into fragments. With that, Simon's privileged view was momentarily neutralized. The vampire butler didn't know when the young man had noticed his presence. Now that his familiar was destroyed, teleportation would be difficult. He would have to fly, which would take several minutes. He thought that if he arrived too late, there would be nothing left, not even the young master. With that in mind, the bat flew as fast as it could, hoping to make it in time before something worse happened. Once the bat disappeared, only the bloody dagger fell to the ground. The protagonist declared that he didn't like being watched by anyone. The demon thought the boy was stressing too much for someone whose days were numbered. Christian knew, judging from the demons he had faced back when he was still Chris, that even if it was a low-ranked demon, this one had to be at least rank 5, but he wouldn't be afraid. To ensure he wouldn't be watched by anyone, he cast a spell on the two vassals of the blonde boy. The youth turned to look at the protagonist in confusion. They were supposed to be on the same side. The protagonist's first strategy was to knock all three down with his magic, but the blonde boy put up a fight, so he had to do it by hand. He had to locate him to make sure he wouldn't interfere with what was about to happen in the battle against the demon. Because of that, the demon misunderstood and thought the man was so desperate he was willing to sacrifice the others. So the demon became interested in receiving them as offerings and decided to spare his life. The protagonist said he had a rule: he didn't get involved with filth like that demon. The demon thought the line was overused but had to admit it was effective. Still, he believed that the sacred sword, which Christian hadn't even been able to wield, was just junk and couldn't help him. However, when the demon attacked, the protagonist managed to defend himself using that very sword which had been called junk. At first, the demon's blow was too strong for Christian to handle. From the look in his eyes, though, it seemed he had a plan to neutralize that demon. The demon, thinking he had already won, simply grabbed him by the arm. He looked at the young man and said that if he made the offering, he could go live out his pathetic little life in peace. But with a smile, the protagonist asked if he really thought only people like him could use the sacred sword. In one quick move, he managed to break free from the giant demon and jumped skillfully to the ground. Once on the ground, he accessed his golden energy core. From that moment on, he would no longer use demonic magic, with the power of light. When the demon saw he could access both energies, he was stunned. Christian, seeing the demon's reaction, asked if he was already starting to panic. The demon swore he would tear Christian's fragile body to pieces. After saying those words, he unleashed a red power, shining brightly toward the young man. At first, Christian had a lot of difficulty neutralizing it, but his power of light was immense. He used a power called Dead Sea Flash, a technique he had learned in his previous life. With that power, he was able to slice through the red energy the demon had unleashed. This caused total confusion in the evil creature. He couldn't understand how a demon could possess such a power. Whether he understood it or not, he was being controlled by Christian through his light magic power. However, he was extremely tired. It seemed his body was still not adapted to that level of strength. Meanwhile, the people he had put to sleep were still lying on the ground. But Christian's strength was so depleted that he ended up collapsing to the floor. His eyes showed the exhaustion and strain he had suffered after fighting the demon. Even so, memories came to his mind of when he had learned to use the Dead Sea Flash with an old comrade. The friend who taught him thought Chris was unbelievable. Just seeing something once, he could replicate it. He was supposed to make a single light slash that would cut across the Dead Sea. The friend knew that, even so, anyone using that technique with a sword wasn't worthy of the light of House Mayor. But he had great confidence that Chris could wield the light that would save the world. At that moment, while Christian was lying on the ground, something lightly touched his head. It was a demon's claw. The young man had caught the attention of one of the demons, who introduced herself as Mapina. Meanwhile, his body was still lying on the ground, but the others who had gone to search had found everyone. In his mind, the demon was speaking, saying she was the first seat of the 7 circles of Gehenna. She said she had been watching Christian's path with great interest. After being taken out of the cave, the protagonist was brought directly to the castle of the Tyreman family. He was surprised to learn that he had been unconscious for 2 whole days, and imagined he might have done something important during that lost time. Despite the frustration, at least his body was intact. His mind was already functioning again, as he immediately began searching for the ebony fragment. Rummaging through his things, he found everything carefully arranged on the bedside table, exactly as he had left it. That's when he remembered Mapina, the name of the demoness who had contacted him so unexpectedly. He knew that some demons, upon recognizing promising talents still young, offered blessings from the higher ranks of hell, but that didn't worry him. Even if she was from the 7th circle of Gehenna, she didn't seem that impressive. Just then, the door opened, revealing the Lord of the Land, visibly pleased to see that Christian had awakened. Beside Count Tyreman was his son, the blond young man who had also survived the demonic assault. Both respectfully greeted him. The Count asked Christian to remain lying down, as he only wanted him to listen carefully to what he was about to say. He explained that the previous day, a detailed investigation revealed that the demon had been summoned and had not appeared of its own will. Even so, the danger was real, and the destructive potential that creature could have caused was unimaginable. Christian knew that if he told the truth and said he had defeated the demon alone, no one would believe him. The Count, showing humility, apologized for underestimating him, mentioning the moment he had ordered the butler to send him to lodge far away. Now he saw Christian as a true benefactor of House Tyreman, someone worthy of consideration and gratitude. The protagonist replied that he hadn't done anything special, only fulfilled his role as a member of the Dark Magic clan, since, in the end, they were all part of the same family. Those words left an impression on the Count, who lowered his head, reflecting for a few moments before smiling faintly. He said that if there was anything he could do to repay him, all the young man had to do was ask. Christian thought for a few seconds and revealed that he wanted to propose a reconciliation between houses Tyreman and Khazar. He commented that the two had been at odds for too long, and that it would be better to act as healthy rivals than as enemies poised for war. He believed that through fair competition, they could grow together, forming a strong bond worthy of the names their bloodlines carried. Naturally, he knew the origin of the conflict came from the main house, which manipulated everything from behind the scenes. The Count asked, surprised, if Christian was suggesting they rise against the central house. The young man calmly shook his head, explaining that they simply no longer needed to serve as pawns in a system that was already corrupted. Smiling serenely, the Count stated that he would contact Count Khazar to discuss the matter in person. Christian was pleased to hear the Count refer to his father as a close friend and show such respect for him. He thought that, when the era of destruction returned, those united houses could form a solid and prepared front line. In good spirits, the Count looked to his son and asked if he was just going to stand there watching, or if he would finally hand over the gift to the guest. The blond young man, excited, handed over the silver orb he had found beside Christian when he was unconscious. He said he thought it might be something important, so he kept it to deliver in person. Christian, however, felt he deserved an even better gift for everything he had done. Count Tyreman, laughing at the boy's boldness, agreed that he truly deserved something more grand. So he gave Christian a summoning stone, capable of storing even a level 4 creature. It was an extremely rare item, almost impossible to obtain, and it came with another promise. The Count stated that he would send an official report to have Christian included in the next ritual of darkness. Faced with such generosity, Christian sincerely thanked him for both the gift and the recognition and support offered. Just as he was getting ready to leave the room, he heard the Count insist that he rest a bit more before any new adventure. After everyone left, Christian gave a slight smile, satisfied with how things had unfolded and with what was coming next. Turning his face, he calmly said that Simon could come out from where he was hiding. The red-haired vampire emerged from the shadows, surprised, since not even the Count had noticed his concealed presence. Christian looked straight at him and declared that it was a pleasure to meet him officially. Placing a hand on his chest, Simon introduced himself as the current head of the Dark Magic clan. But Christian knew there was more behind that name, as he recognized him as Noga's loyal confidant and something even more significant. Clenching his fists, he remembered that Simon was the leader of the Blood Shadow Troop, a group of ruthless assassins. That troop had committed massacres across the continent, attacking both the Magical Empire and the Light faction without distinction. The leader of that group, classified as an 8-star demon, had evolved by the end of the era into a 9-star. He was then recognized as the 10th Demon King, and that man was Simon himself, legitimate son of the Demon King. The revelation visibly shook Christian, as he only now realized who he had truly been dealing with. Simon, on the other hand, found the young man from House Khazar remarkable, praising his elegance and combat ability. He said he knew Christian had defeated the cave demon alone, though Christian pretended not to know what he was talking about. The vampire said he visited the cave and found no trace of the monster, not even signs of reverse summoning. He was impressed with how clean the scene was, as if the demon had simply vanished. He asked Christian to explain how he did it, as he intended to report everything directly to Lord Noga. Christian refused, saying that not even with gentle persuasion would he share the secret. He said that a beast that hides its claws until the end is always more valued than one that shows off. Simon was amused by the young man's personality, but was caught off guard when the boy asked him to apologize. Confused, Simon listened as Christian firmly claimed that what happened was a cover-up. He raised his hand, explaining that he knew it was a summoning, as he himself had been the summoner. Simon began to sweat, becoming serious as he heard the direct accusation from the young man. Christian said that, narrowly, a demonic summoning incident had not led to the death of innocent nobles. Simon closed his eyes and said he would accept responsibility, but Christian replied that he would keep it secret. However, he made it clear that Simon now owed him, and it was a significant debt. Simon only widened his eyes slightly but chose to say nothing more in that moment. He asked if this was a deal, stepping back slowly, trying to grasp the young man's intentions. Christian said he could call it whatever he wanted, and Simon, smirking, agreed before disappearing into the shadows. Still lying on the bed, Christian heard the vampire's voice saying he would eagerly await his visit to the main mansion. He knew that Simon would play a central role in the coming era of destruction, and that meant it was essential to maintain a good connection with him. After that experience during the hunt, the young Messie's personal maid was diligently packing his bags. Everything was ready for them to depart, and just as he was about to leave, something unexpected happened. Althos decided to enter the protagonist's room before the departure, taking the liberty of stepping through the door unannounced. As soon as he walked in, he came face to face with the demon maid and Christian, who seemed to be in high spirits. However, the true reason for the visit was to warn Christian about something he thought was important. He said that, even if Christian might already know, it was worth emphasizing for his own good. Althos revealed that the one opposing his participation in the sacred ebony ritual was Lord Rowan. He mentioned that, although they were in the same rank, Rowan had access to much higher quality elixirs. He stressed that, to most people, Christian was nothing more than easy prey to be eliminated. But Christian didn't see things that way and declared that he wouldn't allow black magic to be monopolized so easily. Althos insisted that he meant no harm. He only asked that Christian refrain from participating in the ritual this time. He truly seemed to be speaking out of concern, although Christian didn't seem to take it seriously. The blonde youth grew irritated, feeling slighted after going through the trouble of coming to warn him in person. He thought Christian was just an arrogant brat. While Christian asked Maya to get ready, calmly Christian placed a hand on Althos' shoulder and asked him to think things through before doing something he'd regret. Back at Count Kaiser's residence, Christian's younger brother was clearly upset. He was eager to train with his brother, but as soon as Christian arrived, all he did was head straight to the training room. Still, the younger brother ran to him, calling him Honorable Big Bro with shining eyes. He reminded him of the promise, saying they had agreed to duel as soon as they got back. Christian looked at the boy and noticed how much he had grown, already reaching mid-rank 2. He knew his brother would also be participating in the ritual of the sacred ebony, which could become a problem. So he told him they should wait until he finished his training, and only then could they duel. The younger brother replied that this time the duel would be completely different, and asked him to be ready. Then he turned confidently and walked away, leaving the protagonist silently watching him. At that moment, Christian remembered someone else who also took promises seriously. That memory strengthened his determination to protect everything he believed in. In the training room, already sitting on his bed, the protagonist held a sphere in his hands. As he observed it, he thought there were only 2 weeks left until the ritual of the sacred ebony. He seemed to be building up the courage to consume the sphere, hesitating for just a moment longer. And when he finally gathered enough courage, he took a bite. Despite the taste being absolutely awful, he immediately felt that it wasn't just the taste that was intense, but the energy within the sphere too. So he lay down and began channeling the energy coursing through his body as soon as possible. He focused on the energy that began to flow from the top of his head, much more intense than expected. The ebony sphere seemed to contain a fusion of light energy and the deepest darkness. He thought that maybe the ecstasy felt by the beast at death had fused into the essence of that matter, and that was why people said the human mind struggled to fully absorb ebony. But for him, it wasn't a problem, as his mind had been trained and prepared to deal with chaos. All that was left was to deal with the light energy, now that he had fully absorbed the dark energy. When the time came to channel the light, he had to take a completely different approach. Unlike most who expelled that energy, he gathered everything into the inner core of light. Suddenly, his eyes opened, glowing with an intense and radiant golden hue. In that instant, he felt the full magnitude contained in the ebony sphere and understood its true potential. 2 weeks had passed since the day the protagonist consumed the ebony sphere. At that moment, his younger brother was pounding hard on the door, eager to demand the promised honorable duel. Christian asked the boy to come in, and upon seeing him, he immediately noticed how much stronger he had become. This left him momentarily speechless, eyes wide and mouth slightly open in surprise. With a sarcastic smile, the protagonist asked why his brother was looking for him so early, questioning if he really wanted to get beaten up, and if so, he'd be glad to help. Thurn noticed that his brother's magical pressure was completely different from 15 days ago. Even though he knew Christian had gotten stronger, he had no intention of backing down. The protagonist stated that if Thurn really wanted to get beaten up, he'd be more than happy to oblige. However, he added a condition. If Thurn lost, he'd have to promise to give up on participating in the ritual of the sacred ebony. Christian explained that, as his brother already knew, it would be like a battlefield, and the weak should stay out. Those words made Thurn completely lose control, as usual, and he drew his sword, demanding his brother do the same. The protagonist replied that his brother still hadn't understood his true intentions, and if necessary, he'd force that understanding into his stubborn little head. As Thurn charged in full force, he left a huge opening and was easily countered. Right after, we saw the scene of the young man lying on the ground, covered in bruises, while their father scolded them both. The count declared that Christian had gone too far with his brother, and that after this, perhaps it would be best if Thurn skipped this year's ritual. Christian, however, asked if he could speak with his brother alone for a while, assuring that they would straighten things out. The count, believing that a moment between the two brothers might help, agreed and left, leaving a heavy atmosphere in the room. Christian looked at Thurn and asked if he was upset, saying he was acting like the petty ones from the Alliance. Thurn replied that his brother seemed to hate him, as if he no longer wanted to see him grow or achieve his own power. He said that every time he improved, Christian ignored his accomplishments and mocked his progress. He accused his brother of hurting him on purpose just to prevent him from participating in the ebony ritual. The protagonist, watching the boy nearly in tears, explained that it was all just a big misunderstanding. He said he only wanted his brother to truly grow stronger and be ready at the right time. He explained that if they competed in the ritual, Thurn would lose the chance to obtain the Shadow Demon, as he wasn't ready. He stated that their duel had been necessary to break Thurn's stubbornness, since the Shadow Demon didn't suit him. According to Christian, what really matched Thurn was the Pale Demon, and that's what he should aim for. Just like light magic was divided into various branches, demons also had different variations and levels. The Shadow Demon was the highest among the lesser ones, and the Pale Demon came just below it. Christian explained that in comparison, it was easier to master curse magic than to directly face the domain of darkness. He also said that during their duel, he could see that Thurn had really fought with everything he had. He said that if Thurn accepted the Shadow Demon before mastering the Pale one, he would have great difficulties later on. That's why he asked him to think carefully before joining the ritual, as his only wish was to see his brother grow, like any good older brother would. He then showed Thurn a gift wrapped in a blue cloth. As soon as the boy saw what it was, he recognized it immediately, an extremely rare and valuable healing stone. He asked his brother why he was giving him that, and Christian replied that it was simply because he liked him. Thurn clutched the gift tightly, holding back tears, unable to believe the change in Christian's attitude. He said he wished his brother had changed before they lost their mother. He revealed that she had suffered a lot because of Christian's rebellious and inconsiderate behavior. The protagonist, sitting by his brother's bed, admitted that he hadn't really understood that kind of feeling before. Meanwhile, in the main mansion of the lineage, everyone was preparing for the big day. Several carriages were arriving, and among them was the one carrying Christian and Maya. The protagonist was intrigued by the distance they had traveled and was thinking about the difficulties of opening a teleportation portal. He believed that that family just wanted to mark their territory. Maya, on the other hand, was extremely happy to be so close to the young master. Radiant, she thought it was amazing that the two of them were together at such an important event. Since the number of companions was limited to just one, and she had sworn loyalty, she was chosen to go with him. As soon as they arrived, Christian noticed several people whispering around him. He asked Maya if she knew who those people were, but the murmurs stopped as soon as they saw who he was talking to. Some didn't understand why the head butler of the family was talking to Christian, since they saw him only as a troublemaker. Simon observed the protagonist closely and noticed that in just 1 month, he had changed a lot. That wasn't the reason he was there, however. He had come under direct orders from Lord Nogoju. Seeing the confusion in Christian's eyes, Simon repeated what he had said before. Right after, another member of the house arrived and asked if the young man hadn't been surprised by all of that. In that large hall, a wide window with red curtains was opened, lighting up the room. The butler led Christian to the old patriarch of the house, announcing that the visitor had arrived. The elder confirmed he had understood. He looked at Christian and said it had been a long time since he'd seen him, then released all of his magical pressure. Even with that gaze that seemed to peer straight into his soul, the protagonist stood firm. Despite being an overwhelming presence, so intense he could barely stay on his feet, the protagonist believed that unleashing all that energy, even knowing others couldn't bear it, was something vulgar. So he clenched his fist and stood his ground, even though he could hardly remain upright. He greeted the Lord, saying he paid his respects to the great master of dark wizards. The Lord looked directly at him and asked if the sudden summons had scared the boy, but Christian replied that he had already expected to be called, since he was a rising star. The Lord agreed, saying that even Marion and Simon hadn't stopped praising him. However, that man had a different perspective. He thought that maybe, just maybe, the young man could live up to his expectations. Faced with those words, the protagonist remained silent, simply waiting to hear what would be said next. The man commented that no matter how promising a seed may be, no one could ever truly know how it would grow. It might end up being just a weak sprout that barely emerges from the ground before withering. However, the protagonist saw things differently. He acknowledged that the man's words weren't exactly wrong. Still, he was fully convinced that this sprout would defy expectations and grow into a mighty tree, or perhaps even more, become the very sky that looms above the trees. But in the end, only time would tell. Turning his head toward the young man, the older man said he would be eagerly awaiting the day that happened. With that, he told the young man he could leave, and upon hearing that, Christian bowed respectfully as he exited. Soon after, Miriam asked her father what he thought of the young men. The man replied that the boy had completely surpassed his expectations. However, he also believed that because he possessed such exceptional talent, his fate would likely be even crueler. Even so, he said that on that day, a small spark of hope had begun to bloom in his heart. His words even startled his own daughter. She had never seen her father place so much hope in someone before. He remarked that perhaps that child truly was capable of fulfilling his oldest wish. As time passed, the eve of the sacred ebony ritual finally arrived. Everything was gleaming and perfectly prepared to receive the candidates. The butlers formally announced the arrival of Christian, the eldest son of Count Khazar, and so entered the young master Christian van Baron Khazar, presenting himself in a strikingly imposing manner. As he walked through the grand hall, the guests murmured about how the patriarch had recognized someone like Christian. But he had already anticipated this kind of reaction from everyone, mostly due to the lifestyle the real Christian had led until then. Besides, there was another factor that simply couldn't be ignored. He was, in fact, far too handsome, and that also drew a lot of attention. Spotting a waiter serving wine, he quickly grew curious and asked if it was an alcoholic beverage. The glasses on the tray had caught his eye, especially because of the strawberry liquor they held. However, he wasn't allowed to be served, as he was not yet old enough to drink. Instead, they offered him a refreshing ginger soda, a beverage more appropriate for his age. Still, that left him indignant. He thought demons didn't need to be such uptight rule followers. While he was thinking about that, he heard the announcement that the young lords and ladies were entering. He turned his head to look. The door, maintaining a sense of mystery, slowly began to open. From it emerged the lords and ladies. The four of them paraded out as if they truly were the crown jewels of the ceremony. The first to enter was Ashid of Barum. He was the second prince, someone Christian definitely didn't want to clash with. Next was Urian of Barum, the first princess, someone he had been warned to be extremely cautious around. And third came Jupine of Barum, the second princess of the house, a young woman ahead of her time. Lastly came the third prince, Misak of Barum, a person who had remained a complete mystery until now. Thus the four passed close to Christian, who quickly noticed that the first prince, known as the Mad One, had not appeared. That was good news, since the first prince, with his long white hair, didn't always attend such festivities. Christian wanted to understand what Ashid intended to say to him, especially after having tried to frame him and create victims through his schemes. To his surprise, the young man simply walked right past him and, as if he were a cockroach, ignored him completely. That filled him with rage. He thought that after trying to ruin him, the guy couldn't even look him in the eye. He quickly concluded that, indeed, he was seen by that prince as nothing more than an insignificant ant. Close by, and making a formal greeting gesture, passed the first princess. She was Lady Urian. At first glance, he noticed nothing particularly unusual about her. He remembered the warning from his aunt, who had advised him to be especially careful with the first princess. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't detect anything strange in her actions or behavior. He decided to set it aside for now, thinking he would uncover it bit by bit. He believed he had already gathered enough information for the time being. Suddenly, someone near him coughed and promptly greeted the young Master Christian. The man introduced himself, saying he was a summoner in the service of young Master Loin. The protagonist turned to the man, trying to keep the conversation civil. However, the man was extremely hostile, stating that, unfortunately, he had heard that someone completely unqualified would be taking part in the event. Naturally, Christian asked if that weak participant happened to be him. The man, without hesitation, confirmed it and said that, if it wasn't him, he should prove otherwise right away. Christian realized who the true rival was. He was watching him from above, full of contempt. It was the young Master Loin, who stared at Christian with pure hatred in his eyes. As he thought about it, the protagonist wondered why, if that young man had so many complaints, he didn't come speak to him directly. Placing his ginger soda on the table, Christian decided to save the best for the day of the ritual. For now, he preferred to provoke the guy a bit more, saying he wouldn't even need a weapon to deal with him. The man, visibly irritated, claimed that Christian would deeply regret everything he was saying, though the young man still wore a completely mocking expression. He was also being closely watched by the two princesses, who gazed down at him as if he were a mere insignificant being. Of course, he took the opportunity to carefully observe the way the first princess was staring at him. The guests simply couldn't believe that a summoning was being performed right in the middle of the ballroom. Looking closer, they noticed that the summoner was being scolded by several spirits who were trying to hit him in a chaotic frenzy. Meanwhile, elsewhere, someone was getting a massage and being treated like a true lord. That's when everyone realized that the real official spirit summoner had been the one responsible for calling forth those entities. He was the one who had originally summoned the evil spirits and directed them straight toward Christian. The young man, with just a simple movement of his finger, managed to completely transform the spirits. He had taken total control of all the entities with a single effortless gesture. Now Christian stood up, asking what had just happened, and whether all of that had been ordered by young Master Loin. As he spoke, Loin stared at him with eyes full of hate, feeling both scorned and humiliated. The protagonist made sure to say that, if the young man had a problem, he could very well challenge him to a duel. But his opponent deflected, claiming that none of it had anything to do with him, and that it was all the summoner's doing, who had acted on his own. Even the summoner himself thought it was cruel to be abandoned like that, especially when he had just been following orders. Even so, Christian decided he would settle everything during the day of the Sacred Darkness ceremony. He believed that the young master was a complete coward, but swore he would teach him proper manners in a way he would never forget. Finally, the day of the Sacred Darkness ceremony had arrived, and everyone was gathered in a massive hall. While many were showing signs of fear, anxiety, and nervousness, Christian was simply yawning, completely relaxed, even while surrounded by them all. The blonde youth approached, asking if he wasn't nervous, especially after all the trouble he had caused. Meanwhile, the arrogant young Master Loin descended the stairs nonchalantly. He was firmly convinced that he was the most capable one to complete that ritual with total glory and perfection. The protagonist just watched him, already thinking they'd settle things right after the ritual. Soon after, someone announced that the ritual was about to begin and asked if all participants were present. He then introduced himself as Sebastian, the assistant butler in charge of the main mansion. He informed everyone that from that moment on, he would be the one guiding the young participants to the sacred site where the ceremony would take place. In front of them all, Sebastian conjured up a kind of illusory portal resembling a basement, or perhaps an alternate dimension. The protagonist knew very well that, in truth, it was just an illusion, a sort of virtual space created specifically for the ritual. At the lead was Sebastian, moving with his staff in a remarkably swift manner, just like a real elf should. So fast, in fact, that the others began to fall behind, forced to rush so they wouldn't get lost along the way. Thus, most panicked, running like madmen, afraid of being left behind and failing the exam. On the other hand, a few kept their composure, moving quickly but with control and focus, following Sebastian closely. Only a very small number could keep up with the pace, step by step, of the one leading them. Meanwhile, most of the participants were sweating heavily, thinking the whole thing was far too irrational to comprehend. The deeper they descended underground, the steeper and more difficult everything became. Even the little blonde and the young master, who considered himself the best of all, couldn't make sense of that absurd slope. Still, everyone kept going down, until Sebastian looked back and ordered everyone to hurry up immediately. He warned that the floor wouldn't support them for much longer, and as soon as he said that, some of them began to plunge into the void. There were those who, upon looking back and seeing the others falling, were thrown into utter despair. That test, beyond demanding physical endurance, was also extremely psychological, and anyone with a weak mind would surely be unable to withstand it. Sebastian noticed they were far behind schedule and therefore ordered them to pick up the pace even more. That forced everyone to run even faster, trying not to be left behind. After some time, most had already fallen, defeated by their own illusions and inner weaknesses. At that moment, young Loin looked satisfied, believing that most of the useless worms had already been eliminated. However, when he looked to the side and realized that Christian wasn't even sweating, he was utterly shocked. The protagonist simply stared back at him with a mocking smile, making it clear that this was incredibly easy for him. Provocatively, he asked Loin if he was tired, saying that, in the end, he seemed strong only on the outside. He remarked that, being from the main bloodline, Loin probably relied more on expensive potions than actual training. Anyone with a weak mind would suffer physically, since moving linearly through an illusionary space was extremely draining. But for Christian, getting tired was not an option. No matter how much effort was required, all he needed to do was slightly distort the space magic formula, and everything became simpler. Meanwhile, Sebastian, looking back, noticed that the young man was progressing through the trial with complete calm and ease. He knew perfectly well that this was Christian, the young master everyone had spoken so poorly about. Only a few had managed to make it through the corridors up to that point. The place was extremely dark, so they had to light several candles and lamps to illuminate the circle where everyone was supposed to gather. The four who adapted best to the test were now gathered around Sebastian, awaiting the next stage. Meanwhile, Christian asked the blonde boy if he was doing okay, adding that maybe he should have trained a bit more. Suddenly, a voice spoke to them. It seemed to come from a magical stone that was slowly taking on a more defined shape. The protagonist watched carefully as a bright light began to shine over all of them, announcing that this was indeed a sacred place. Soon, that presence took physical form, introducing itself as the administrator of that space and welcoming all the young masters. That entity informed them that the young masters, along with the third demon lord currently in power, would have the chance to acquire a powerful dark mage. With that, an ancient magic was activated, and a magical arrow began to point out the path meant for each of the participants. The administrator began casting a spell on all the candidates, marking each of them appropriately. He explained that the amount of power available there wasn't enough for all the young masters to share. In addition, the beasts that inhabited that place would be responsible for testing whether each young master was truly qualified. Upon hearing that, Christian raised his hand and asked bluntly if what he meant was that whoever arrived first would get everything. The administrator, looking at Christian, acknowledged that, as expected, he was extremely sharp. He then asked whether, if something unexpected were to happen to the other competitors during the ritual, it would result in disqualification. The administrator replied that, since the paths were different and separated, it was unlikely they would cross. A countdown began, making it clear that they shouldn't waste time getting into conflicts with other participants. Everyone was already properly prepared, and the administrator emphasized that each one should focus solely on their own safety. Young Master Loin could barely contain his excitement, waiting for the moment when they would all be sent to their assigned paths. When the moment finally arrived, the administrator wished them all good luck, and each of them dashed toward their designated route. In the center, only the administrator and Sebastian, the goblin responsible for leading them to that place, remained. Sebastian, curious, asked the entity if it wanted to place a bet on who would win the competition. The entity, which until then had been very serious and silent, considered whether it should at least enjoy itself a little and accept the bet. Meanwhile, the contest was growing more intense, and the candles continued to burn, dimly lighting the tense environment. In a long, well-lit corridor, some of the young masters were running hurriedly toward their respective destinations. At the end of one of the doors, there was a deep darkness from which several glowing eyes could be seen watching those who approached. In front of the door, a massive creature appeared with at least 4 eyes. It growled menacingly, making it clear that it was extremely savage. It was ready to face any young master who dared to cross through that portal. For participant Loin, that didn't seem like such a big challenge. He gathered energy in his hands and began facing the wild beast. He believed it would be easy for him. However, he truly hoped from the bottom of his heart that it would be extremely difficult for Christian, even wishing for his failure. In fact, he found amusement just imagining his rival completely crushed, desperately fighting for his life. Originally, all paths were supposed to be the same length and have balanced trials. However, one of the responsible sorcerers had been bribed and therefore placed much stronger beasts along Christian's path. Now he would have to face extremely powerful monsters both in the west, the east, and the south. Everything had been coldly calculated so that Christian would suffer a tragic accident during the ritual. If something happened to any participant during that ceremony, no one would question it. That place would simply become Christian's grave. When he finally reached the gates he believed led to the sacred land, Loin was pleased, certain he was the first to arrive. However, he heard a familiar voice. It was Christian who said he was late and asked what had taken him so long. With his arms crossed, Christian claimed he was almost dying of boredom from waiting. In disbelief, Loin asked how he had managed to get there so quickly. Bringing a hand to his mouth, he muttered that it was impossible. After all, there were incredibly strong monsters along that route. With a light, provocative smile, Christian replied that now everything made sense. He finally understood that Loin's level wasn't all that high after all. It was clear to him that it had just been a poorly executed setup, something the young lord didn't like hearing one bit. Christian then warned him that for a while they'd be alone there, and that was more than enough time to teach him some manners. He clenched his fists, ready to fight. Loin claimed he was prepared, since it was forbidden for competitors to fight during the ritual. However, he argued that if it was for self-defense, there would be no penalties, so he decided he would crush Christian right there. But when he tried to land the first blow, Christian simply dodged, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. The protagonist quickly realized his opponent was using martial arts, combining close-range bursts of magical power with physical combat techniques. He was using joint locks and fast strikes to try and neutralize his opponent. However, no matter how many times he tried, Loin just didn't realize it was pointless. Christian would dodge as many times as needed. The young master started to lose control, cursing and getting increasingly furious, convinced he'd eventually catch Christian off guard. Christian, on the other hand, took advantage of the fact they were alone, and raising his hand, seriously considered that this was the perfect moment to put him in his place. Smiling wickedly, he said that young lord really was very naive. Then he made an unexpected move. He grabbed his opponent's hand and squeezed with tremendous force, making it clear that his intention was to teach him a lesson, practically. And to educate him, he decided it would be necessary to break his arm. The pain surely would make the rival learn something. Christian even warned him that if it hurt, he could cry all he wanted. And without delay, he simply broke the opponent's arm. The young lord screamed in pain like he had never experienced in his life. Completely shaken, he let out an agonizing scream that quickly drew the attention of those nearby. Soon after, the little blonde showed up in a hurry, having heard the screams, and ran to the scene in desperation, shouting that it was already too late. The protagonist was sitting down, and near him were two young men lying on the ground, looking as if they were just taking a nap. Faced with that, Christian asked the little blonde if he preferred to lie down quietly and sleep, or if he would need a little motivation for that. The blonde stubbornly said he wasn't there to fool around and that, if necessary, he would charge at him. But it didn't take long, just a single blow, and he immediately changed his mind, lay on the ground, and decided to sleep. Christian knew that 5 years from now, the first war against the Alliance would take place. Before that, he needed to secure the Dark Mage at any cost. That's why he was convinced that not a single grain of the sacred darkness could be shared with anyone. He believed that now, everything was resolved, and that he alone would walk through the gates. As he saw them starting to open, he believed that was the moment to claim the sacred darkness entirely for himself. He knew that the sacred ritual of darkness was the power that granted the possibility of becoming a true transcendent.